Mike Awesome's tragic demise. Michael Alfonso, better known as Mike Awesome, was a pro wrestler whose meteoric rise to fame was just as big as his tragic downfall. At the height of 6'6" and weighing nearly 300 pounds, Awesome didn't have to look too far for wrestling promotions that wanted to see what he could do. Awesome's first big rise to fame came when he wrestled as the Gladiator in Japan for the promotion Frontier Martial Arts Wrestling, or FMW. If the name FMW sounds familiar, that's because I talked about it in my last video when talking about Hayabusa. Awesome's ability to do high-flying feats at such a large size made him a huge attraction for FMW, and also got the attention of many other promotions in the process. During Mike Awesome's time in FMW, he would also start a feud that would last him till almost the end of his career. That feud, of course, being the one he had with Masato Tanaka. During Awesome's time in FMW, he was also the longest reigning world champion in the promotion's history. Mike Awesome, or as he was known as at the time, the Gladiator, would win his first world championship in FMW in 1995. Unfortunately, not too long after, Awesome would suffer a knee injury that would force him to vacate the championship in January of 1996. Funnily enough, in May of that same year, Awesome would return and win back the World Championship from Super Leather, a character who was played by former WWF star Corporal Kirshner, who was heavily based on Leatherface from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. By August of 1997, Awesome was a double champion. However, that would change when he would lose both the Independent Heavyweight Championship and the Brass Knuckles Heavyweight Championship to Masato Tanaka. Mike Awesome's Brass Knuckles Heavyweight Championship title reign lasted for 489 days. As if that title reign wasn't already impressive, his Independent Heavyweight Championship reign would come to an end at 291 days. In 1998, Mike Awesome would leave FMW because he didn't like the way he was being booked. During most of Mike Awesome's run with FMW, he was also taking bookings in America for ECW. ECW would end up making Mike Awesome a pretty popular name in the American wrestling scene. In 1998, Awesome would finally start appearing for ECW full-time. Mike Awesome's new run in ECW would begin with him reigniting his feud with Masato Tanaka. This feud, however, would end up coming to a screeching halt. During a match with Balls Mahoney in September of 1998, Awesome would tear his anterior cruciate ligament. This would put him out of action until September of 1999. In a shocking turn of events, in his first match back in a year, Mike Awesome would defeat both Masato Tanaka and Taz to win the ECW World Championship at Anarchy Rules. By early 2000, Awesome had already become a two-time ECW World Champion and an ECW Tag Team Champion alongside Raven. Awesome had also gained a manager in the form of Judge Jeff Jones, a guy who was supposed to be a court judge, I guess? I don't really know what his deal is. In a move that would shock everyone, Mike Awesome would appear on WCW Nitro on April 10th, 2000, while he was ECW champion. According to Lance Storm, one of Mike Awesome's friends, Awesome had refused to sign a new contract with ECW due to Paul Heyman owing him overdue wages. In an attempt to avoid a lawsuit, WCW made sure that Mike Awesome never brought the ECW title out with him on TV. Eventually, Paul Heyman and Mike Awesome would reach a compromise that would have Mike Awesome lose the championship. At an ECW event in Indianapolis, Indiana, Mike Awesome, a WCW contracted wrestler, would lose the ECW World Championship to Taz, a WWF contracted wrestler. After this, Awesome would regularly be featured on WCW's Nitro and Thunder. He would eventually be a member of the New Blood, a faction run by Eric Bischoff and Vince Russo, which was a faction comprised of the young wrestlers in the company who were tired of the old wrestlers getting in their way. Awesome would start a feud with Hulk Hogan as a member of the New Blood, which made it seem like he was going to have a promising run with WCW. In May of 2000, Mike Awesome would gain the nickname The Career Killer after throwing Chris Kanyon off of the top of a triple cage onto the stage. Unfortunately for Mike Awesome, 2 months later, WCW would have other plans for him. In May of 2000, Mike Awesome would begin a gimmick where he was known as, wait for it, the Fat Chick Thriller. For those who are unfamiliar with Mike Awesome, you're probably wondering what the hell a Fat Chick Thriller is. Well, WCW, for some reason, decided that Mike Awesome's gimmick should be that he is attracted to overweight women. Why? I have no idea why you would want him to be doing that. But that's what happened nonetheless. Later that year, Mike Awesome would once again receive a gimmick change where he was now known as That 70s Guy. That 70s Guy was a gimmick which was trying to piggyback off of the success of the sitcom That 70s Show, which at the time was insanely popular. During this time in his career, Awesome would start making his hair look like he was from the 70s and would wear lots of denim to match. He would also get a school bus that was painted to resemble the bus from the show The Partridge Family. During this time, Awesome would begin a feud with Vampiro and the Insane Clown Posse. By January of 2001, the That 70s Guy gimmick was dead, and Awesome would join Team Canada alongside Lance Storm and Elix Skipper. This would lead to him being rebranded as the Canadian Career Killer. However, it wouldn't last very long. During his time with Team Canada, Awesome would lose a hair versus hair match to Conan, who was replacing Billy Kidman due to injury, and Awesome's longtime mullet was cut. After getting his hair cut, Awesome didn't really do anything else of note. On March 26, 2001, Mike Awesome and Lance Storm would get defeated by Chuck Palumbo and Sean O'Haire in a tag team title match, which would end up being the final episode of WCW Nitro. In March of 2001, the WWF would purchase the entirety of WCW, including the contracts of some of their performers. On June 25th of 2001, Mike Awesome would appear backstage during a hardcore match between Test and Rhino and would win the WWF Hardcore Championship in his debut. This would be the beginning of the infamous Invasion storyline where superstars from ECW and WCW were teaming up against the WWF. A few weeks later, on July 12th, Jeff Hardy would defeat Mike Awesome to win the Hardcore Championship after a distraction by Edge. This would lead to a brief feud between Mike Awesome and Lance Storm and Edge and Christian. At the Invasion pay-per-view, Mike Awesome and Lance Storm lost to Edge and Christian, and eventually Mike Awesome would start falling down the card. In November of 2001, Awesome would suffer an injury that would keep him out of action until July of 2002. By the time Mike Awesome had returned to the now WWE in the summer of 2002, the entire landscape of the company had changed from what it was in 2001. The WWF was now WWE, SmackDown and Raw were now their own separate shows with their own separate superstars, and Awesome had really no place on the card. Upon returning in July of 2002, Awesome was drafted to the SmackDown brand where he would exclusively appear on their B show Velocity, where he would lose to guys like Funaki, Tajiri, Mark Henry, and Bull Buchanan. On September 27, 2002, Mike Awesome along with Horace Hogan and Shawn Stasiak were released by WWE. What I'm about to read to you is an excerpt from a shoot interview that Mike Awesome did in 2003. Being in the WWE sucked. I hated it. You had to kiss everybody's ass, you had to be on your political toes all the time. You would not believe the backstage politics. You were getting stabbed in the back constantly. I was so happy when I was told I was gone. Mike Awesome would have a brief stint with TNA Wrestling from March to April of 2003. He would have matches with Perry Saturn and Mike Sanders, as well as compete in a battle royal. Awesome would leave in April. In 2005, Mike Awesome would have one last match for WWE at the ECW One Night Stand event, where he would wrestle Masato Tanaka. Awesome was heavily booed during the match due to how he left ECW, but by the end of the match after defeating Tanaka, Awesome received a standing ovation and was cheered by the fans. From 2003 to 2006, Awesome often bounced around between independent wrestling, as well as working in Pro Wrestling Noah and All Japan Pro Wrestling. In 2006, Mike Awesome retired from pro wrestling and became a real estate agent. Unfortunately for Mike Awesome, his life would begin to take a turn for the worse. In early 2007, Mike Awesome's wife told him that she was leaving him. This led to Mike Awesome apparently getting physical with his wife, and he was arrested for domestic violence. After being released from jail, Mike Alfonso was found dead by some of his friends in his home. Mike Awesome was only 42 years old when he decided to take his own life. WWE would pay tribute to Mike Awesome by airing an in memoriam graphic at the beginning of the ECW episode following his death. Awesome will mostly be remembered as one of the greatest big men in pro wrestling who unfortunately never got to reach his full potential due to ridiculous booking and backstage politics. An episode about Mike Awesome was originally supposed to be made for the series Dark Side of the Ring. However, the episode was canceled due to the producers not being able to reach an agreement with Mike Awesome's family. That is what ultimately made me decide to go in depth on the career of Mike Awesome. Ox Baker is accused of murder. Ox Baker was a wrestler from the Territory days who worked for a lot of the companies that were big at the time, including the WWF, NWA, and WWC. Baker's appearance made him stick out a lot compared to his fellow wrestlers because of his very long eyebrows and mustache. Baker's other claim to fame was his finishing move, the Heart Punch, which, thanks to booking, was made to look like the most devastating move in wrestling history. However, Baker's finishing move also caused lots of controversy. On June 13, 1971, Ox Baker and his partner Claw would wrestle Cowboy Bob Ellis and Alberto Torres in a match for the AWA Midwest Tag Team Championships. Tragically, not long after the match was over, Alberto Torres passed away from heart disease. Despite Baker not having any involvement with the man's death, the booking committee had the idea to say that Baker's heart punch had caused Alberto Torres' death. This would result in Ox Baker becoming one of the most hated heels in the Territory days, as his heart punch was now considered deadly. The next year, in 1972, Baker would once again fall into controversy. On August 1st, 1972, Ox Baker would have a match with Ray Gunkel. Baker would hit his famous heart punch at some point during this match, however, Baker lost to Gunkel. Not too long after the match was over, Gunkel collapsed in the dressing room. Ray Gunkel would end up passing away from a heart attack that was caused by a blood clot. Once again, the bookers decided that they should blame this on Ox Baker's heart punch to reinforce his heel persona. In 1974, Ox Baker would have a match with Big Cat Ernie Ladd. During this match, Baker would end up hitting Ladd with the heart punch several times, causing a riot to erupt. While I think it's kind of morally wrong for these companies to be using wrestlers' actual deaths to enforce a heel persona, back in the day, they did anything to keep the fans thinking that wrestling was still real. They didn't want the fans knowing that the matches were scripted or predetermined. So, this was one of those ways they kept the fans believing. In December 2013, Ox Baker would wrestle his final match, and unfortunately in 2014, Baker would pass away from a heart attack at the age of 80. While Ox Baker was innocent and didn't actually kill anyone, this is still a cautionary tale of the lengths that promoters would go to keep the fans watching. The Crimes of Hardbody Harrison. Harrison Norris Jr., or as he's better known, Hardbody Harrison, was a wrestler who worked for WCW from 1995 until 2001. Harrison got his start working at the WCW power plant, and in 1995 he would make his debut. It was very rare to see Hardbody Harrison on the winning side of any of his matches because he was mostly used as an enhancement talent. In 2001, Hardbody Harrison retired from wrestling after the WWF did not pick up his contract after the WCW buyout. Harrison, however, is more famous for the crimes he committed outside of the ring rather than the work that he did in it. In 2004, Harrison was arrested on 3 counts of false imprisonment. However, the next day, he would post his bond. In August of 2005, Hardbody Harrison would have both of his homes raided by the FBI. On October 18, 2005, Harrison was arrested by the FBI on a 9-count federal indictment for false imprisonments and trafficking women for commercial sex acts. On November 22, 2007, Harrison was found guilty and convicted by a federal judge on charges related to keeping 8 women as sex slaves. Harrison would serve as his own attorney in this case, and he had tried to claim that the women were living with his wife and child because at the time they were homeless and wanted to train to be pro wrestlers. Harrison had also tried to claim that he was helping these women get clean from drugs. However, that was not true. Harrison had also forced these women to memorize some kind of commandments that he had come up with, as well as put them on a rigid training regimen. He had also forced them into a chore plan where if they had failed to do any of the chores, they would have to pay him back with money. On April 1st, 2008, Hardbody Harrison was sentenced to life in prison. Harrison will forever be remembered as a horrible human being who did some terrible things to innocent people. Thankfully, Hardbody Harrison will have plenty of time to think about all of the horrible things he did as he spends the rest of his life behind bars. Jerry Lawler has a heart attack on live TV. Jerry the King Lawler had a pretty successful career in the wrestling ring. However, a lot of people know him best for his work at the commentary booth. While I could go in depth on Jerry Lawler's career, today we're just going to talk specifically about an incident that occurred in September of 2012 on an episode of Raw. On the September 10th, 2012 edition of Monday Night Raw, Jerry the King Lawler and Randy Orton would compete in a tag team match against Dolph Ziggler and CM Punk. Orton and Lawler won the match, and afterwards Lawler would return to the commentary booth during the commercial break. Later on in the evening, during a tag team match between the Primetime Players and Team Hell No, Lawler could be heard snoring through the microphone. Michael Cole, who was on commentary with Lawler, had said that he thought Lawler was doing a bit where he was pretending to fall asleep. So Michael Cole asked, "Jerry, what are you doing?" After looking over at Lawler, Michael Cole noticed that Lawler was face down on the announce table and was breathing very heavy. The doctors would come over to check on Lawler, and after checking on him, he collapsed on the floor. Lawler was having a heart attack on live TV in front of millions of people. Thankfully, WWE's medical team got Lawler on a stretcher and took him to a hospital in the local Montreal area. Meanwhile, Michael Cole had stopped calling the action in the ring as he was sitting at the commentary table worried for his friend's life. After the match had finished, Michael Cole would tell the world that Jerry Lawler had suffered a medical emergency and was being rushed to a hospital. There would be no commentary for the rest of this episode. Jerry Lawler would survive his heart attack and would come back to work to commentary not too long after. If Lawler hadn't survived this heart attack, this would have definitely been one of the most darkest moments to happen on WWE television. The Great Khali accidentally kills a man. Dilip Singh, better known by his ring name, the Great Khali, was a wrestler who most people would describe as not very good in the ring. However, it wasn't necessarily due to a lack of trying, it was more or less just that, well, Khali's legs were so long that he had a hard time moving around. While the Great Khali had a pretty decent career, winning the World Heavyweight Championship and also being a WWE Hall of Famer, that is not what we are here to discuss. On May 28, 2001, the Great Khali was training with fellow APW wrestler Brian Ong. After hitting Ong with a flapjack maneuver, Ong died as a result of the move. While it may seem pretty cut and dry, there is actually more to this story. Earlier that day, while training, Brian Ong suffered a concussion. Rather than let Brian Ong recuperate from his concussion, the APW staff mocked him for wanting to quit. A lawsuit was filed against APW by Brian Ong's family. However, the Great Khali was not listed in the lawsuit as he was basically just doing his job. Brian Ong's family was awarded $1.3 million after APW was found liable by a jury. 4 years after this incident, the Great Khali would sign his first WWE contract. At the end of the day, this is just another example of a wrestling promotion not caring about the well-being of their performers. And the sad, honest truth is, well, I don't think it's going to be the last time I'll be covering a case like this. Bray Wyatt dies too young. Wyndham Rotunda, better known by his ring name Bray Wyatt, is probably one of the most beloved pro wrestlers of the last 15 years. Wyndham's first big exposure in the WWE was when he joined the cast of NXT Season 2 under the name Husky Harris. Husky Harris, with his mentor at the time, Cody Rhodes, would not win NXT Season 2, however, Husky Harris would make it to the main roster. Harris would end up joining the Nexus stable led by Wade Barrett and would also continue to stay in the faction under the leadership of CM Punk. In 2011, Husky Harris would receive a punt from Randy Orton that in kayfabe broke his neck, which would write off the Husky Harris character. In 2012, NXT would ditch the game show format and would become WWE's new developmental brand. This would be the beginning of the Bray Wyatt character, where Bray, alongside Eric Rowan and Luke Harper, would form the Wyatt family. The Wyatt family would be a cult-like stable and was unlike anything else in NXT at the time. Eventually, in 2013, the Wyatt family would join the Raw brand and would make a huge impact upon their arrival. The Wyatt family and Bray himself would have a number of notable feuds and would be one of the most popular teams on the roster, with their feuds against John Cena, The Shield, and The New Day truly cementing that fact. Eventually, after a brief period of the Wyatt family breaking up, they would reunite and Braun Strowman would be added to the group. In 2017, Bray Wyatt would win the WWE Championship at the Elimination Chamber event. However, about a month later, Bray Wyatt would lose the title to Randy Orton at WrestleMania 33. By the end of 2017, the Wyatt family had split up for good, and Bray Wyatt was now in a tag team with Matt Hardy. Bray and Matt Hardy would win the Raw Tag Team titles, however, eventually at some point in 2018, Bray Wyatt would get injured and would be out until late 2019. During this time he was injured, Bray Wyatt decided he was going to completely reinvent himself, and boy did it pay off. Around the middle of 2019, Bray Wyatt would begin airing vignettes where he would act as a Mr. Rogers type kids show host character, before eventually unveiling his magnum opus. Bray Wyatt now had an alter ego known as The Fiend, a character with a grotesque mask and a horrifying smile. The fans really loved the Fiend character, and after feuds with Daniel Bryan and Finn Balor, WWE decided it was time to do something with him. The Fiend would eventually defeat Seth Rollins and become the new WWE Universal Champion. While it seemed that things could only get better from here, WWE would do a monumental fumble of this character. After a terrible Hell in a Cell match with Seth Rollins, being squashed by Goldberg, and the Burnt Fiend in general, Bray Wyatt's character of the Fiend had kind of become, well, a joke. Bray Wyatt would go on a long hiatus after WrestleMania 37, and eventually later that year, Bray Wyatt was released from his contract. Bray Wyatt would only be gone from WWE for a little over a year, and he would return at the Extreme Rules pay-per-view in 2022. Eventually, Bray Wyatt would introduce a new character called Uncle Howdy, a character played by Bray's real-life brother, Bo Dallas. Eventually, Bray Wyatt and Uncle Howdy would begin feuding with LA Knight, and at the 2023 Royal Rumble, Bray Wyatt and LA Knight had a Mountain Dew Pitch Black match, which was basically a Falls Count Anywhere match with a bunch of Mountain Dew Pitch Black logos and a bunch of black lights. Wyatt would defeat LA Knight, but this would not be the end of their interactions. Bray Wyatt would end up hitting LA Knight with a Sister Abigail at the Raw is 30 event, and afterwards would share a passing of the torch moment with The Undertaker. The Mountain Dew Pitch Black match with LA Knight would end up being Bray Wyatt's final match. Bray Wyatt would eventually start teasing a match with Bobby Lashley at WrestleMania 39. However, this match would never come to fruition as Bray Wyatt was suffering with health issues. On August 24th, 2023, Bray Wyatt died from a heart attack in his sleep. He was only 36 years old. Bray Wyatt leaves behind the legacy of being one of the most entertaining performers in WWE history. Whether he was the new face of Fear or The Fiend, Bray Wyatt left the fans wanting more everywhere he went. Hey guys, thank you all for watching. I know I left out a few details of Bray Wyatt's story, kind of like, the Alexa Bliss stuff, the Braun Strowman feud in 2020. But to be fair, Bray Wyatt's story is going to be covered many, many times in the future, and the documentary about Bray Wyatt on Peacock, I can't remember exactly what it's called, but it was very good. I'll admit, I cried at the end. It was a very sad story, but they go pretty in depth into Bray's career, and they talk to a lot of his friends and family, who all give their personal stories about him. But thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed this. My next video is not going to be one from this series. I'm going to be taking a brief break from this. But hopefully you guys like it. It's going to be a copyright strike nightmare because it's going to be a WWE theme songs list. My top 100 favorite to be exact. But thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Like and subscribe if you want to see more. And take care and have a good day.